You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin, Tony is with me, and we're here to discuss everything from July 8th through the 14th. We have a bunch of news to discuss, and we do have a conversation kind of in line with something that we were talking about last week about the massive amount of money that's being thrown around for films in general at some of the streaming services. But before we get to that, let's get into the news. So first up with Netflix, there is a project called Emily in Paris that was originally slated for the Paramount Network that is now moving over to Netflix. Netflix has also adjusted their previous decision, as The Crown will in fact have 6 seasons. Now, specifically related to this, there was word initially that there was always going to be 6 seasons, and then something happened, either the creator or Netflix, something happened within it, because after the 4th season premiered, they announced that it was actually going to end after 5 seasons. And everybody's assumption at the time was, well, of course, this is because the show is doing well enough, but Netflix wants this show to wrap up. So they just said, can you condense it? The creator had the ability to do it, and that's what happened. Now, whatever's changed since then, because this was back in, I believe, December or January that the news of just having 5 seasons came out. Now it's back to having 6, and the creator is very happy with it and said that they're going to do it. So the question is, who was the one who wanted it that way in the first place? Was it Netflix because the show hasn't been doing as well as it previously had? Or was it the creator wanted to wrap up the series and now they've realized, either side has realized, no, we really do need to have 6 seasons not to make this all crammed together. So that is a very unique situation because you don't see reverse situations when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is very unique for Netflix. They've had a lot of shows over the years that have been huge hits, and hits that in shows and properties that would warrant another season just due to the fan base and the reception and ratings and all that type of stuff. But this is the first time I've really seen a big reversal like this. Second time. It was some TV show that got canceled, and fans petitioned, and basically they got a movie out of it to wrap up the rest of the series. Yeah. That's the only other time where I've seen Netflix make a pretty big reversal on a decision. So, obviously the Netflix has found a great property in The Crown with a great fan base and creators that definitely have a vision for the story, and I appreciate that they're not trying to cram in the rest of the story into this last final season. When you have a final season, there's a lot of weight to it because you want to give the fans something that they want, but you also want to close your story as well. You want to end your story as well. I think it's good that the creator is being like, hey, we need an extra season, even if it's a mini season, half the normal, or just a few extra episodes to tell the story in its totality. So overall, I'm grateful that Netflix listened to The Crown's creator, and to Peter Morgan, and I'm curious to see what the reception is on that. But overall, this is kind of huge in terms of Netflix news. This hardly ever happens. So congratulations, The Crown. You're in an elite category.
All right, so then jumping over to Prime Video. Prime Video has launched user profiles worldwide. This is obviously in line with a lot of the other services out there. Pretty much every service out there at this point has user profiles that allows multiple different users to use the account. And that way you can have different watch lists and different, lists of stuff that you want to see in the future and things like that. Also keeps track of what you've watched, so you're not rewatching things you've already seen. There's also a series called Jungle Prince of Delhi, which is a series that is in development at Prime Video as well. And this is based off of something that was from the New York Times that is in development. And recently, we're going to talk about something that has to do with Hulu in a second here, but the New York Times specifically, I read an article saying that the New York Times is trying to get involved in a lot more film and TV series projects, and this is one of them.
It makes a lot of sense of why they would. The New York Times is traditionally a newspaper, and newspaper business is not dying. It's been dying for a very long time, and I think New York Times is one of the better players in the game in terms of having an online presence and trying to convert from a traditionally paper business to a digital space. But obviously, dealing with ads and stuff has just been hard for them. So it makes sense why they would go to films and TVs and those types of projects, podcasts. I mean, just different areas to tell different stories. But overall, this story is pretty crazy. Essentially, somebody's lying about being royalty, and yeah, if you read the premise, it's a very interesting story, and I'm very curious to see how this is going to go down. Overall, I think Prime Video might be the best place to do it, just because they take very interesting risks and will funnel a lot of money at this. So I'm curious about the story. It's one of those. It's like you can't believe it's true, but it is true, and I think bringing a story like this to life in via film is great.
All right, so then jumping over to the Hulu, the series that they have is called The New York Times Presents, which is a monthly docuseries focusing on a very specific topic. The very first episode is focusing on nurses dealing with the coronavirus or COVID-19. That one premiered just last Friday, and that is the new series, and that you'll be getting a new episode every single month on Hulu for that series.
This is the next evolution, right, of their show, The Weekly, right?
Yes, it does say that is like succeeding The Weekly.
Overall, I mean, once again, I think it makes total sense for New York Times, who, just by nature of their job, they have a bunch of stories, and some make it via print and get really huge. But there's a lot of good stories out there that aren't being shared with the rest of humanity, and I feel like doing a TV show like this, monthly series, I think weekly is kind of pushing it in terms of, I feel like sometimes you have to reach for a little bit of stories, but I think monthly is going to be great, and you can spend more time to make sure that everything just looks good. But overall, I mean, I feel like we already have a show like this out there. It's called 60 Minutes, at least in the States, where the CBS takes 60 minutes and delivers the news topically. So I'm curious what's going to set them apart, this New York Times Presents, apart from the other competitors that kind of tell the news in this type of fashion. But overall, this is going to be really cool, and I'm happy for New York Times.
And then jumping over to CBS All Access, the UEFA Champions League will in fact be on CBS All Access when it returns. They will be live streaming games as they are actually playing them, and a new deal with CBS All Access.
This is, I think, great for CBS All Access, and especially, capturing soccer, football to everyone else outside America. Getting part of the Champions League and getting a part of soccer is huge for the platform. And CBS All Access, CBS, already in the United States is able to broadcast a bunch of different games from different leagues, and it makes sense that they would expand it to soccer, and it makes sense that they'd expand on their streaming platform into soccer, because it's pretty much the only sports genre itself. Soccer is the only thing that's being played right now, pretty much. So overall, it makes a lot of sense, and it just seems that once again, we see this big push for streaming services to get some type of live sports content. CBS All Access is riding that train.
All right, and then Apple TV Plus, there is a graphic novel adaptation of the story Snowblind that is going to be landing at Apple. This is going to, Jake Gyllenhaal is attached to star, and then we have Idris Elba has inked a first look deal with Apple. Now, we've seen plenty of first look deals and exclusive deals with producers of content, and we've recently seen some high-profile actors ink first-look deals with some of the services. The one that immediately comes to mind is, I believe it was Salma Hayek for HBO Max was the most recent one that we saw. But now Idris Elba has inked a first-look deal. Now, I know that a lot of actors also have production companies as well, but this is unique specifically because he has made projects at other streaming services. There was a series on Netflix that he did that not only was he a producer for, but he also starred in, called Tune Up Charlie, that ended up getting canceled at Netflix. And more recently, he had that Elba vs. Block show on Quibi, which also got canceled. So it's unique for no other reason than he's had two projects on two other streaming services that unfortunately were canceled, and now he's moving over to Apple. Now, obviously, that's not to say that the projects that he potentially could be working on or anything like that, they're not good projects, but it does say something. And I will say, I actually watched the Tune Up Charlie series that was on Netflix. I actually found it enjoyable. I didn't have a problem with it at all. It did feel like it was, a step above typical sitcom with a better production value and things like that. But I think that story-wise, it probably wasn't up to par with something you would typically expect from him. but my wife and I enjoyed it. And we expected there to be a second season, but there wasn't. So Idris Elba will be having some new projects coming to Apple sometime in the future.
I think this is great for Apple TV Plus. They are trying to spin their way out of the current predicament, and some of their shows and content is pretty good, I have to be honest, but they're not reaching the market that they want. And I feel like Idris Elba, he is that type of actor that is really diverse, and he plays comedy well, action, horror, thriller. I mean, he is a very diverse actor, and many people know about him from many distinct projects that he's a part of. So I think this is a huge win for them, and I like everything that he is in, and I like his overall, just his take on his characters. I feel like he's just a great actor. So I'm really happy about this, and I'm curious if this is going to be a trend for Apple, if they're going to push for more first look deals from other high profile actors, or this is just kind of not like a one-off, but just a very specialized case. But overall, I'm happy for Apple TV Plus and getting an actor like this. This is great.
All right, so then Disney Plus, only one bit of news. There's a Clone Wars spin-off. The Clone Wars animated series is getting a spin-off called The Bad Batch, and that's going to be heading to Disney Plus in 2021. As far as Quibi goes, there's the Long Distance Relationship Project is moving forward. Then we have Quibi says that they are developing a documentary about the history of reality television. Quibi is also creating a series based on the horror manga series Tomi. And then this is probably bigger news. Quibi has won their turnstile technology lawsuit against Eco, which I guess some people were assuming that wasn't going to go their way. That's, of course, the good news. The bad news, however, is that Quibi has potentially lost 90% of their subscribers after the free trial period ended. So there are great numbers of, I guess we were sitting at maybe 2 million, 3 million max. They've lost about 90% of those, according to some stats out there, which, of course, is a horrible conversion rate. It just means that their content is not up to par with what people expected for the price point that they were expecting people to pay. So not surprised, but at the same time, it is definitely not saying good things about Quibi's future.
I remember how we were talking about Quibi and how we mentioned that their conversion rate is going to be the biggest factor for their success. And after this free trial, which was a very extended free trial, 3 months free trial is crazy, especially since a lot of their content, their first wave of content ended during that time. It just shows that their product is not good, which I think some of it's okay and some of it's just like whatever. But I think overall is that they misjudged the whole entire marketplace, and just the vision just is a failed one. That stinks. It stinks for the people who work at Quibi. It stinks for the projects that they were able to broadcast on their platform. But I mean, overall, it just seems like it's just a failed vision. Just too many things added up. Just their stubbornness and reluctance to pivot to what people were asking for. It just seems like they were so out of touch. And so overall, this is one of my biggest worries. And I think that, we've talked multiple times about the multiple rounds of negative news, negative press that's come out of Quibi basically since they've launched. But this is one of the most damning pieces of information that's come out. And I'm not sure how long they're going to stay afloat and be in business, just because they might have the current cash at hand. But investors at some point are going to be like, hey, either we need a change in leadership or we're just going to let this thing die. So, I mean, it's pretty dreary news to hear, and it stinks. But some ideas just don't work out, and Quibi is definitely one of those. So, all
right, jumping over to HBO Max. HBO Max has picked up the animated series Young Love. There is a crime drama called Rip Crew that is currently in development as well. The documentary Class Action Park is going to be heading to HBO Max. We have Ravi Patel's Pursuit of Happiness, which was originally slated for CNN. That is also going to be moving over to HBO Max. Getting into some of the detailed stuff, a former Hulu exec has been named to lead HBO Max's international expansion. Juanis Larker, I'm probably butchering that, but their main focus is going to be expanding into Latin America first, which we already knew was going to be their first goal of expansion. And then eventually they're going to be expanding elsewhere. There was recent word also that there's been some new executives as part of HBO Europe to start laying the groundwork for that, even though that's further out. But Latin America is in fact their first point of expansion when it comes to the service.
I mean, I think this is a great pickup by HBO Max. Once again, we're just reaching into the relationships that some of their executive team has. I mean, Jason Kilar was from Hulu, and now we have another former Hulu executive who ran his own streaming service in Saudi Arabia. You know, Kilar had his own one before he came on HBO Max. So it seems HBO Max is really diving in and wanting to get people with industry experience and not just with the traditional, running a studio, either televisions or movies, that type of thing, and for linear TV and whatnot, but really focusing on, okay, let's get former executives that were started a streaming service from scratch. Like Hulu back in the day was a pretty scrappy little business, and it did revolutionize. Them and Netflix kind of changed a lot. Now Hulu's numbers are very different, but at least the United States, they were one of the two big players in pushing things forward. And so this is great for HBO Max. Just getting that type of experience with streaming, and their international expansion. I mean, I think HBO Max has overall been a pretty solid experience and launch. It's a decent hit. There's been some hiccups along the way, but at least in America, it seems like they have it's rolled out reasonably well, and now it's looking forward of international expansion, and getting somebody of this caliber is just it's fantastic. So kudos to HBO Max, great hire.
And probably the biggest news, at least as it pertains to the two of us, is that there is a companion series to the upcoming Batman film that will land at HBO Max. Now, it will focus on the Gotham City Police Department. If you guys who are listening to this are unaware, Tony and I met actually through working on a Batman website called thebatmanuniverse.net. So this is pretty big news for us. I'm pretty pumped about this news, mostly because I think the idea of expanding the universe of DC films outside of the individual films is great. I mean, it's in some ways it's on par with what Disney's doing with Marvel. We've got the Marvel films, and then we have Marvel TV shows that are coming to Disney Plus. So that's all great. But it really is nice to see that there is going to be some sort of connection with what's going on between the DC films, or at least some of the DC films that are being released in theaters, along with projects that are coming to theaters about series that will potentially tie in to this. Now, the real important thing is that the director of the Batman film, Matt Reeves, who is also a producer, he is going to be the producer behind this project as well. Also named the other person who was named is Terrence Winter, who was previously the creator of Boardwalk Empire. So those are some big names that are coming to that are behind this series, and it directly ties into what's happening with the Batman film. Of course, some people out there are going to be like, well, we already had a show called Gotham, and it did deal with the Gotham City Police Department, but I think a lot of people who know the comics and expected high-quality content were let down, including myself, but I'm really pumped about this project coming to HBO Max.
Well, I think there's a few differences between the Gotham TV show that was aired on Fox and the one that is going to come out on HBO Max. I mean, one of them is it's the Gotham is pretty standalone. I mean, it's set in the Batman universe, but it's not connected to any larger project. It's pretty much on its own. So they took they took many creative liberties in depicting the source material and adapting from it. And my opinion on the show is a little bit higher than yours and some other fans that we both know personally. But it's not the worst thing ever. But it's definitely a huge change from the source material. And so when you're expecting a show that's closely tied to the source material, and you have that big giant disparity between the two, I mean, that's just huge cognitive dissonance. And it's once I was able to get over that, I was able to enjoy the show more. But yes, it is very different from the comics. However, I am happy for the show on HBO Max, and it because it is anchored to the Matt Reeves movie. So if the Matt Reeves movie is great, then this is going to be a very good launch. The show's going to go well. But if the Matt Reeves movie is not well received, then I'm very concerned about this television show. However, I am happy that for HBO Max, just the unique platform that it is that it does have its reach into big box office universes and feature films and stuff like that. But then there's also the synergy that can happen between the big movie side and the television side. And you could tell two concurrent stories that talk about different parts of the universe that still match up pretty well. And if you want to compare franchises and universes and stuff like that, I mean, we can look over to the Marvel universe, to the MCU, and see that the MCU is obviously done well. And they have different television projects that with differing successes. They had a TV show on ABC. That too, but one of them mainly is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that show barely referenced the MCU movies and the continuity, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're in the same universe because this one reference that people might understand, but overall it wasn't really connected. The television side and the movie side was very disconnected. Same thing with the Inhumans TV show. They have other shows that the Netflix television shows, the Marvel Netflix television shows. The head of TV and Marvel said that, oh yeah, it's part of the same universe, but it was very distinct. Just didn't reference anything at all, really. And so I think for some comics fans, there's this concern that, okay, we've seen this idea play out before of there's this big movie and then you're gonna have like a companion TV show. And my concern is that it's going to be very distinct from the movie and there's not going to be much interaction, much universe sharing between the two. It's like, oh yeah, we're part of this, reference this, but really we're going to do our own thing. That is my one tiny concern. And we can see that, the MCU basically recognized that they had this huge problem with their television properties and basically scrapped the Netflix shows, scrapped some other content, and basically is their movie side is also developing its own TV shows. So needless to say is that hopefully HBO Max follows kind of in that same vein, and that their universes are actually going to share moments between the two and actors can appear on one and the other. And so that'd be pretty cool. So I am very happy, but I'm like cautiously skeptical just because of different superhero TV shows that have kind of flopped in the past a little bit, trying to manage my expectations a little bit.
And finally, the last bit of news we have from HBO Max is that there is an animated series called Chinos that is headed to HBO Max with pilot order. This is coming from the Fresh Off the Boat creator, Eddie Wang, and that is coming, well, it has a pilot order at this point, and there's some concept art actually in the article itself on Deadline. All right, jumping over to Peacock, we have a couple of different things. There is a potential for some new originals from Dick Wolf that may be heading to Peacock. If you're unfamiliar with Dick Wolf, you might not be super familiar with entertainment in general because he's been creating a lot of content for NBC and more recently a couple of shows on CBS for a very, very long time. He's the creator behind Law & Order and the Chicago franchise and such, where there's a possibility that new series could be heading there, specifically a new version of Law & Order. We've seen multiple versions of Law & Order. Special Victims Unit, which is Law & Order SVU, has been the one that's been on air for over 20 seasons, and there's the potential is there for more series. All right, then the other news is that Peacock will be streaming Premier League matches next season, whenever that starts. That specifically comes from NBC Sports Gold level. They will immediately go over to the Peacock streaming service in the future.
Once again, same basic comment as I would have for CBS. This is great for NBC and for Peacock in general. Trying to get part of that sports realm and getting into that is going to be great. And just like CBS, NBC has a huge reach in sports space. They have multiple. They just know the right people to get a deal like this done. And so Premier League is huge, especially outside the United States. So this is a great way to really push the platform forward and to reach new heights.
And then the other part of the Peacock launch, now if you're listening to this, Peacock is actually already launched. We decided not to hold back the episode specifically for the launch. The launch is happening on July 15th. This episode is obviously releasing on the 16th. We'll be talking about Peacock more at length next week, due to the fact that their national expansion is actually happening on the 15th. But specifically, I've already signed up for Peacock. I'm already planning on taking a look at it and giving a full review of it next week on our next episode. But with the launch of Peacock, one of the things that a lot of people probably remember from the initial investor presentation that happened back in January is that they announced that there was going to be a number of NBC focused channels as part of their free option, and some of those channels would focus on showing off clips, famous clips from The Office, or showing off clips from NBC News or SNL skits and things like that, and it'd be a continuous ongoing station or channel that you could watch literally all day long, depending on what it is. And it's free. There's ads interspersed in it, but that's the idea. Well, with the launch of Peacock, they've actually announced that the Today programming, so the Today Show that we all know, that is the amount of programming that's coming from the people behind the Today Show is going to go up significantly, because The hosts themselves are going to be creating content, original content for the service. There's going to be even more things that are interspersed so that there is a number of content that can be interspersed throughout the entire 24 hours of every single day. So there's a lot of content coming from there, along with all the other channels that they have that will be streaming nonstop 24 hours a day.
This is a smart decision. I'm thinking about Peacock and kind of how it would fit. I personally would not have expected any Today programming. I wouldn't have expected any Today content getting on the service. I mean, besides maybe just reruns of different shows, but having specific content just for Peacock is actually pretty smart because there are a large group of people that really love their morning shows and content like that. And they have demos for cooking and crafts and just, I think it's just huge, and it's going to gather a different demographic than we usually think of streaming service. You know, people that just love television shows and binge content and feature films and, you know, action, stuff like that. But there's just also a huge amount of people that just are cutting the cord, and that having Today content is interesting to them, it's educational for them, or it's just, I know many people that put on the morning talk show thing and they go clean the house and listening to The View. So overall, this is a great idea, and hopefully it garners a lot of viewers. Once again, I wouldn't predicted that they would do this, but I definitely see the audience that they're trying to reach, and I think that it's a huge opportunity.
All right, so with all of that being said, that is all of the news we actually have for this week. We're going to move into our main discussion, and it correlates with some topics that kept coming up last episode. We were specifically talking about the exorbitant amount of money that that films are bringing in from streaming services alone. We've seen a number of deals, high-profile deals, high-money deals over the past couple months with specifically with Apple TV Plus. We're going to talk about a lot of Apple TV Plus with this, but a lot of projects out there have been demanding an insane amount of money, and they're landing at streaming services because of it. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking specifically. Now, we're not going to talk about every single one, because the other problem is we don't know exactly how much some of the projects were, but just some of the notable ones that have happened during the pandemic situation. We had a film called My Spy, which was originally meant to be coming in theaters in April. That ended up going to Prime Video. We have no idea for how much. We had another film, and I don't remember the name of it, but it ended up on Netflix from Paramount. That one was supposed to come out in April too. Then there was The American Pickle, which is coming to HBO Max in August. That was supposed to come out in June, I believe, in theaters, but then HBO Max picked it up. Recently, we've had Greyhound, which was supposed to release in theaters this summer. Apple TV picked up that one, and we do know that one was picked up for $70 million. There's the project recently, we talked about last week, Emancipation. I'm not sure exactly when that was meant to come out, but that one was picked up for probably about $120 million. Then we have The Trial of the Chicago 7, which was picked up by Netflix for $50 million. There's a lot of projects in general that have been picked up that were originally slated for theatrical releases, and due to the pandemic, happening in general, but then also the time frame of when everybody assumed things were going to get back to normal continuously being extended, and the movie theater is not opening. We're running into issues where there's less and less. Everything has to keep getting pushed back, and then you run into, you've got these mid-range budget films that are going to be potentially competing against a lot of high-profile, high-budget films. So it's not worth it for them necessarily as a company to release them in theaters, because they're not going to make an insane amount of, they're not going to make a bunch of money. They were never intended on making a bunch of money, but they're definitely not going to make a bunch of money if they're competing against a lot of really high profile films. The question, of course, comes down to why is it that a company would put something on a streaming service rather than letting it release theatrically, specifically when it comes to some of these films that are raising astronomical amounts of money. Now, I think the difference, of course, is that there's certain projects that can demand a lot of money. If you had a project that was Star Wars or Marvel, and I know that this would never happen, but if you had a project that was being shopped out there as something that could end up on a service that obviously isn't Disney Plus, those things could obviously demand a lot of money. But when you have films that they're kind of they're one and done situations, you have a series, you have a film that is basically meant to be just a single film, supposed to make a bunch of money, and instead it comes to, their hope is that it makes a bunch of money, or it could be for the awards They're hoping that it can be nominated for some awards, and of course you get that acclaim that comes with it. But the problem is, when you look at something specifically, I'm going to take this one as an example because it just came out. Greyhound. Greyhound was bought for $70 million by Apple. Tom Hanks himself, of course, did not like the fact that the film was actually purchased by Apple because he wanted it to release in theaters. Now, Greyhound releases. Now, that film ended up, it released just last week. And the question is, did you see a huge bump up in Apple TV Plus subscribers? No, you didn't. And the question is, how is Apple in general paying as much money as they are for some of these film projects and seeing some sort of return? Now, before we get into the minute details of Apple versus the other services, we also know that Apple has absolutely no problem with spending more money than they really need to for certain projects because they can. They have the ability to. They can outbid a lot of companies because they just have extra cash. So it's not so much about that, but it is, as a business that, you would assume does not have an unlimited supply of money, you have to make smart decisions on how much you're paying for some of these film projects so that you actually can make a profit. There's two articles that specifically popped up that we're going to be referring to. Both of them are worth checking out. The first one was by Scott Mendelson over at Forbes, where he talked about the success of Hamilton for Disney Plus still doesn't compare to a successful theatrical run. That film was, as we know, purchased for about $75 million. We do know that Disney Plus had a decent bump up when it comes to the number of people downloading the app. But of course, the question is, does that correlate to how much money they would potentially bring in if it was a theatrical run? Now, with a theatrical run, there's a lot more things that go in line with it. You've got to spend more money marketing. You've got to split some of the money when it comes to the theaters themselves and things like that. So there's more cost associated with releasing a film theatrically than on a streaming service. However, there's nowhere near the amount of money that's brought in from a streaming service than the theatrical release, especially for big budget films. So that was the first article. The second article actually dives into looking at the success rate of films that go straight to streaming services and skip theatrical in general. Prime Video is a perfect example of a service that they originally had films that they were paying for and releasing in theaters, and then they would bring them to the streaming service Prime Video later on down the line, but they ultimately were not making a lot of money in the theaters, and they actually ended up losing money in some cases because of that theatrical run. They have now foregone the entire theatrical release for some of their films because it's not, they understand now it's not exactly hugely beneficial for them to do that. So the real question that I want to talk about, and it goes all together, is how is it that we can have streaming services spend as much money on a project as they do and then expect some sort of return? Now, obviously, the longevity of a project it's always going to be on the streaming service once it's purchased by the streaming service, unless, of course, there's some sort of rights thing that has something to do with how long it's supposed to be there. But generally, it's going to be there forever if it's labeled a Netflix original. That's just how it goes. But how is it that Apple can sit here and spend $70 million, $100 million, $120 million on some of these projects and actually expect to see some sort of return?
I mean, I feel like that's the biggest question in the room. In terms of Apple in the streaming space, it's I almost feel like we can't even answer that question correctly. In comparison to the other companies that are in the streaming space, Netflix is kind of the king of this, but it is a prime example as well. Amazon is another good example of this as well. But it seems that traditional streaming companies are very data driven. And so they're all, once again, about the data, and they get the reports and projections and all that stuff. Not to make it boring, but it seems that they're very data focused. And so the products that they choose are algorithmically chosen, curated, or whatever, with different keywords to reach certain demographics and to get, a certain amount of viewership and to retain viewership. Just they have the most data in the space, and they just have great data business lines. Apple feels like they're playing from the playbook of yesteryears of basically, hey, here's our checkbook. This project seems good. It's got either a high profile creator, a high profile actor, or it's like very tropey, I guess. World War II submarine fights. Like that's gonna it's a project that will just get people's attention because it's like World War II submarine fights in the Atlantic. Like, that's going to get you Tom Hanks, like, of course. But I mean, I watched the movie when it came out, and I was so pumped for it. I saw ads basically the 2 weeks prior, and the movie was like 1 hour and 20 minutes of content. Now it says it's like an hour and 30, 40-minute movie, but the other 10, 15 minutes is just the runtime of the end credits that just went on for forever. But the movie itself was like an hour and 20 minutes, and it's pretty short for a movie. And I've been seeing, ads all week long, and knowing the purchase price that Apple got for the film, I was expecting something a lot bigger and huge, but really you could have, it just felt like a waste. I was expecting more at the end, like an hour and 20 minutes. I was sitting on the edge of my seat, and I'm like, all right, where's the third act? I'm ready to go. And then it just ends. And it's just like, there wasn't much resolution there. And that was pretty annoying personally. And so Apple spent a whole lot of money, and I feel like the quality of the film they got was okay at best. Like, I felt like it was missing something. And I feel like Apple's is the only way to get out of their situation, because they don't seem to have people in place, although they're working on that. They don't seem to have the true infrastructure or data gathering and stuff like that in place, because it doesn't seem like they're doing much analytical, data-driven business right now. It doesn't seem like they're doing that. And they're playing off of the old Hollywood playbook. And that's why I feel like they're behind. Apple just had cash, and it just seemed like, hey, let's go down, let's make a streaming space. We did it with iTunes. Why don't we take that success from iTunes and tweak a few things and be good to go? And it's like, no, it's just totally different. And I feel like that's why they're so behind, and they're playing off the playbook of yesteryear, and they're not playing with the same playbook. They're not playing with the same offense, essentially, as a Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or some people like that. And that's what's concerning to me. And that's why I feel like, how are they making profit? Or how are they might even be profit. It might be like spreading brand awareness or brand recognition. And just from the other metrics we've seen from companies that do social media imprints, like if your goal is to spread brand awareness and recognition with these high budget things, it doesn't seem like they're moving the needle that way either. Like, sometimes some projects are not meant to make money. They're meant to basically be crazy marketing ideas. And it doesn't seem like they're even pushing that forward. So that's the confusing part for Apple specifically. And globally, when we talk globally, how we talk about streaming services making money off of films, I feel like it's a complex situation that I feel like even the best in the industry haven't quite figured out exactly how much a feature film is really useful and worth to the business. I think TV shows, it makes a lot more sense because it's longer content and it takes a longer time to get through. And so I understand the mechanics of that. But for some movies, it is hard, and they do have to make that balance between the two. And sometimes choosing immediate money up front versus waiting for the box office to come out, especially in a time when you have COVID-19 still shut down a large amount of the U.S. theaters, which is where most box office, where for big budget movies, about half of the revenue comes from. But for lower budget movies, pretty much all of it. I feel like people are, here's the science. This is how you do streaming. This is how you do blah, blah, blah. But it still feels just a little bit of people are just testing out new hypotheses left and right. And Netflix has just done it long enough that they're good enough. But I feel like even them, it's some of their projects, the higher budget movies, it's just like, how are those movies profitable? And because Will Smith had a movie on Netflix a while back, he was like playing buddy cop with an alien. And I heard that one had a huge budget, but like flopped in terms of like viewership response and stuff.
That was Bright, and I'm not sure where you heard that it flopped. I mean, like, it did horrible as far as Rotten Tomatoes goes. But it actually did get some buzz about it, as far as it feels like any movie that comes out of Netflix, regardless of how well it does on Rotten Tomatoes, ends up getting good viewership.
Well, I mean, I can't even trust Netflix's numbers because all you have to do is watch 2 minutes of the film, and watching 2 minutes of that. I mean, come on. And that counts as viewership now. That's why I still feel like the streaming space is still trying to figure itself out in terms of market dynamics. It's just it's still in its infancy, and it's hard to say that because Netflix has been around as the industry leader for about 10 years now. And you think after 10 years you would have there'd be some concrete science behind how stuff works, but it still feels like it's get on top and go with it. The streaming space is weird, and it's just weird to talk about, and it's weird to watch Apple's business model in comparison to everybody else's, because it's like you shouldn't always do exactly what everybody else is doing, but sometimes it's at least good to look around and say, why are they doing that? And maybe you can get somewhere. Just, I don't know. I'm so frustrated with Greyhound because I had huge expectations for it. And I was very happy with some of the other Apple things I saw. But when you're hyping up something this huge and so many ads on other platforms, and it just fell so flat, I was just like, really, Apple? Like, this is where, you're spending $70 million a pop on content like this? It's crazy.
The thing that I guess I'm constantly thinking about is I just don't. There's the whole playbook, like you mentioned, of pulling out the checkbook and just spending it for however you think makes the most sense. But I just don't see how it makes sense in their minds and how this is working. It just, to me, feels like they're making large purchases just because because they don't have a lot of other content, and these films give them some sort of content. We know that there's second seasons of a lot of their shows coming, but at this point in time, they're not obviously filming any of those series. They're not going to be coming in the very near future. So it really just feels like they're bolstering what content they have with these films so that way they stay relevant. And that's unfortunate. But when you look at some of the other players out there, you look at Netflix, you look at HBO Max, they're obviously buying projects too, but it doesn't seem like they're even anywhere near the same. Netflix, obviously we just talked about last week the $50 million project for the trial of the Chicago 7, but however, $50 million isn't that much when you put in comparison to some of the other films that Netflix has actually done. Bright is a good example because that film itself cost well over $50 million to make. The budget was projected between $90 and $100 million, so it's not as if that did anything near the same. But then just last year, we heard about how we had The Irishman, which was a huge film. Everybody made a huge deal about it, and outside of it bringing in some people to watch it, there's word out there that film potentially cost $300 million to make, which is an insane amount of money. Now, they didn't go buy that project. They actually brought that project in and paid from it, from in-house.
Unlike Netflix, Apple TV doesn't have a good infrastructure to create content on their own. I mean,
create content or even promote content on their own by themselves.
I mean, Netflix. Yeah, we talked about The Irishman, but how many other films did they do that were modest, that hit the key demographics that they were trying to aim for? I mean, so many movies that just aren't even mentioned, but do just good enough. Like they do a lot more. They produce a lot more stuff than I think we kind of give them credit for, not for any fault of our own. Just
this past week,
so much stuff that there's no way that we can cover it all.
Yeah, this past week they released The Old Guard, which was a Charlize Theron film that's supposed to be like a franchise builder for Netflix, which is based off of a graphic novel. And that film, there was people talking about it. They've been releasing it, I'd say at least one or two films every single month. There was Spencer Confidential that released back in, I think it was March, with Mark Wahlberg. There was the one with Ryan Reynolds that released last December. That these films always come up whenever they're talking about their quarterly earnings and stuff, about how well these films do. And that's why they keep making them. But when you look at Apple, they're not putting out one or two films every single month in conjunction with a ton of other content. We talk about how much Netflix spends as overall, how much money they're spending. They spend an insane amount of money with content. But the one thing that is in their favor, of course, is that, one, they're spending money. Yes, they are taking debt in most cases when it comes to as they continue as a business for right now. But they also have 150 million subscribers that are paying on average $10 a month every single month. So, I mean, it's not like they don't have money coming in from the service. Apple, on the other hand, has a service that is probably bolstered most by the fact that the majority of their subscribers are customers of Apple products that were given a free year of Apple TV Plus for free for the first year. And that's still going on. So they still have to make it relevant enough for those people to eventually, when they lose their free version of the subscription, to try to stick around. And we've seen how that worked for Quibi. If you don't have content that draws people in on a regular basis, they'll leave. They have no problem leaving once the free trial, the extended free trial is up. So I think that the problem with Apple is that they're on a completely different wavelength than all the other companies. And I think that it goes along with the fact that they do have a lot of content that is in the works. They have lots of projects that we've heard about that are currently being put together, that are in development. And I think there's a lot of projects that could do really well for them. But the problem is it's a very, very slow build for them. And the problem is for now, they're just throwing money and they're trying to see what films are out there that they can get for the service so that people are potentially checking out the service. I mean, there's projects I want to see on Apple TV Plus, but have I signed up for it? No, not yet, because there's just not enough to warrant me signing up. And right now I just don't have a ton of time. So there's that too. But honestly, it's one of those things where Apple has to eventually get to the point where they can't be spending as much money as they are on some of these film projects. And like we talked about last week, them spending as much money as they are on some of these projects is bad for the industry as a whole, because it puts projects more at a higher price point than they really should be long term.
I agree. Just looking at Netflix, maybe paying $50 million for the trial of the Chicago 7, we were criticizing Apple TV Plus for spending a lot of money on content. But I think what's different for Netflix is that they have consistently shown that either the content that they buy, the properties that they buy, and the properties they produce in-house are up to a level that they're really good hits by differing measurements, but they're hits by some metric. Whereas in Apple, no, they're acting from a place of desperation. They're acting from a place of, we don't have it in-house to create, so we're going to have to buy from the outside. And when you get to that place of desperation, you probably are going to tend to overbid on projects that are really about probably a 7 out of 10, 6 to 7 out of 10, and you're going to treat them at like an 8 or 9 out of 10 if you're going to rate the movie, the project. So that's where Apple is playing from. They're playing from desperation. And when you are in a desperate state, you tend to make big risks. You tend to take big risks. That's just the curse of building versus buying. And that they should have waited a year for the streaming service so they could have content at launch that they could have bought from other players. They could have developed in-house. They could have really worked on, decoupling their streaming service just from the Apple platform. And I think that's I think that they thought that was going to be a huge selling point. But when you think about like internationally, outside the United States and Europe, iPhones aren't that huge of a phone in comparison to Androids. Just the market just is way different internationally. And so maybe finding a way to decouple the streaming business from their iPhone business, their Apple business. So it's just they're reaching, and they started too soon. They should have waited a year. And it just ultimately at the end of the day, it's gonna hurt them back and potentially spoil this business for the future. Of that, maybe by the time their in-house talent can get going and they have a few projects that are pretty decent, they're going to be so far behind that they're going to have to cancel the service. It's just weird.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is just worth noting to kind of wrap this up is that while they probably should have waited another year before they launched, I think the biggest thing is for them, they didn't want to be the last major streaming service to launch, because a year later would have put them even further out than Peacock. And now we know that CBS/Viacom CBS is putting together something new that won't launch until 2021. I think that Apple, because they always want people to believe that they're forward thinking, wanted to get out ahead of the pack. But the problem is they just didn't have the amount of content to really draw people in. There's certainly content there. There's certainly content that I think a lot of people would check out. But I think the problem is that I don't think anybody who isn't getting it for free is wanting to go spend money for an additional service, even as inexpensive as it is, and take it on just to watch a couple of shows. It's just unfortunate, because that's the way the mindset is for these, for these streaming services. You expect a lot of content, even if you're not even watching a lot of content. I mean, I have a Netflix subscription. I watch content on Netflix, but do I watch, if I'm watching a series, I might be lucky if I have time to watch, one season of a show that's 10 episodes long per month, maybe. And that's ideal, because there's other content out there. And unless you are under the assumption that the only content out there is your own content and everyone's going to want to check out yours, and if you are under that assumption, then you probably need a lot more than just 8 shows that you launch with. So with that being said, that's going to wrap up our discussion. I do want to encourage you guys to check out the 2 articles that were the basis behind this discussion. Like I said, the article on Forbes from Scott Mendelson, and then the article from the Entertainment Strategy Guy. Those articles are found in the show notes that you can find on our site, thestreamingwars.io. With all that being said, check out the trailers. There is a good chunk of trailers that have released over the past week. There's some worth noting. One specifically that I know Tony and I both enjoyed was the season 2 trailer of The Boys, which is coming the beginning of September. That was one project that we both were talking about when that trailer launched.
Oh, that was so good. Just even the teaser trailer for the trailer, man, The Boys, so good.
So definitely check that out. With all of that being said, you can follow us on Twitter and join our Discord to check out all the articles that we talk about here on the podcast. Follow us on Instagram for announcements related to new episodes of the podcast releasing. And you can leave us reviews wherever you are listening to the podcast, though that is always greatly appreciated. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email with questions, comments, concerns, topics you'd like us to discuss at thestreamingwars@gmail.com. We are always looking for topics of discussion for future episodes. With all of that being said, for Tony and myself, this has been The Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.